Thank you so much, Lauren, and thank you, Rachel and Michelle. First, I'd like to tell a quick story about what motivates me in some of this work. Why am I interested in tree health monitoring? And I really think it's based on the fact that I learned about emerald ash borer when it was first detected in 2002 in the Detroit, Michigan area. Since that time, emerald ash borer has killed tens of millions of trees and threatens almost 8 billion ash trees in this country. One of the astounding things I learned was that in 2002, when we detected it, we went on to study, where it came from and when it got here. And we found out that the emerald ash borer had been in the Detroit area for about 10 years. To me, that's just too long to detect a major insect pest that could impact both our urban forests and our natural forests. Why did it take so long to detect? Basically, it's because we didn't know to look for a small green insect that was really focusing on ash trees. I started to think about how we might do a better job of detecting incipient health problems when the next, perhaps exotic invasive insect or disease came into this country, and started to work on developing some techniques that we could use to detect tree health, not just when trees became dead by mortality studies, but covering a full range of health from early stages of stress to later stages. And to do this, we came up with some methodology that allowed us to look at the crown of the tree, which is where we start to see incipient stress symptoms, especially with leaf discoloration and leaf defoliation. And then as trees become more stressed, they start to lose leaves or not put as much energy into growing leaves. And so the crowns become more transparent. You can see more sky through them. This continues to lead to fine twig dieback, where the twigs just can't support leaves anymore. And then we have a metric we call crown vigor that really encompasses all of the variables I just discussed, along with signs of large dead branches and then, of course, death. How we handle these metrics when we put them all together is that we treat them statistically and create a Z-score to standardize these for each species. And then we come up with an average score, which allows us to rank trees in a way that you see on the bottom of this figure, from early signs of stress, pretty healthy, all the way to some later signs of stress. These are all based upon ocular estimates and are really designed to be easy to use. To this end, since forestry professionals really don't have enough people to get eyes on trees around the country, we started to think about using citizen science or civic ecologists in this work. One of the central questions here, of course, is, sure, we can train people to volunteers to monitor tree health, and it's great for environmental education and engagement and learning about the resource. But is the data really useful to the forest managers? Can it be used to detect tree health problems and help get more eyes on trees around the country? In order to answer this question, I took advantage of a personal situation where my nephew, Tanner, was looking for a Eagle Scout project, and he came to me and asked me if I had any ideas. And at that time, he lived in a small town in Wisconsin called Oconomowoc, between Milwaukee and Madison, and they had experienced emerald ash borer and had several large dead ash trees within the city. And I said to Tanner, why don't you go to the city forester and find out if he would like more information about the state of the ash trees in the city. And when Tanner went to the city forester, he learned that they have a tree inventory, so they knew where all their ash trees were, but they didn't have the person power to go out and reassess those trees after the emerald ash borer had come into the city. So Tanner and his Boy Scout troop decided to take this on, and so we were able to gather the locations of all 300 ash trees within the city. And I spent part of my vacation training Tanner and his troop and some of the parents to assess ash trees in the city. And over the course of the summer, I had a couple of phone calls with Tanner, and things were going pretty well. And by the end of August, he said, yeah, Uncle Rich, we're done with this project. We've got all of the data. And I realized that this was a perfect opportunity to go back out and remeasure some of the very same trees that the troop measured to see what the accuracy was of their data and how useful it might be. And along the way, we started to, so first, our basic research questions were, can volunteers trained in tree health assessment actually collect data that's useful in order to prioritize ash trees for removal? And then what's the level of agreement between the volunteer ratings and the ratings by a tree health assessment expert? Along the way, we created some replicable training protocols that really actually inform our work now as we expand our work into, I think we're into 15 cities now around the country. And the first thing is, when we're working with civic ecologists, is try to introduce the project stressing the utility and the importance of the data. In other words, why are we asking our volunteers to go out and do this, and what will we do with the data they collect for us? The next step is to really describe the problem. And I already did this a little bit with talking about emerald ash borer and how it has spread across the country. And you can see on this map, this is as of September 1st of this year. It is traveled all the way to the East Coast. It was detected in New York City last year for the first time, and it continues to spread and kill ash trees across the country. So how do we train people in the use of these methods so we can get replicable data from each of the raters? The first thing I like to do is, before we even start on talking about what variables we use and how to do the ratings and the methodology, is we go out together and look at trees that cover a range of stress. And what I always find is that people know a sick tree when they see it. And interestingly, when we ask people to talk about why they think this tree is more or less healthy than this other tree, they're typically talking about some of the same variables that I introduced earlier in this presentation. They're noticing that some trees have lots of leaves and they look healthier. They see dead branches on trees. They see that some trees have fewer leaves and maybe don't look as healthy. And so we talk about these things really in an effort to honor the knowledge that they already have, that they already bring to the table in this work. From there, we really talk about coming up with some introduction of rubrics. And this is really important, because what we want to do is we want to make sure that when you have different raters rating the same tree, that they come up with substantially similar answers. And this is where the rubrics come into being really important. It's like rules to a game. So when we talk about discoloration, we have a guide, and we have visual guides to help us. And this is an example of our field guide. It's a two-page field guide that you can bring out with you and use it to help you come up with clear ratings based on clear rubrics. After we go through the training on the rubrics and really understanding and dialing in on what these variables are about, we go back out and we all rate the same trees. So it's a collaborative scoring of trees to norm the expectations. And this is basically taken from the literature in the educational field, where teachers are rating essays, which is another subjective rating system, which is really important. And so this norming piece is really important for making sure everyone's on the same page, and we work on this together. After the norming phase, we go out and we have separate trees that we've flagged where we work in teams, just as we would in the field when we go out to do the project. And separately rate the trees. And this way we can get teams together to rate similar trees and come up with a discussion of error. And in science, we talk about error, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. We have variability in our measurements all the time. It's really just figuring out what the error bars are around the estimates, and those are the little I-beams you see in the graph here, and how much in agreement are we between raters of the same tree, and then between, what is the, quote, correct rating for each tree. And so a graph like this is something from one of our training sessions, and you can see that there is some variability in some of the metrics, and this isn't necessarily a bad thing. This provides a basis for discussion to do further norming and make sure everyone is on the same page with this. And so this is something we go back into the classroom after the training session and talk about. And typically, it's really helpful for this discussion to take place. So how did they do after they finished the project at the end of the summer? Here are a couple graphs that compare the ratings that the Boy Scouts did with what the experts came up with of the same subset of the same trees. And on the left graph, you can see that there's pretty good agreement between the rater and the expert rater on the x-axis and the volunteers on the y-axis. And it's not perfect. And so then the question becomes, where are the differences showing up the most? What part of the stress cycle are we seeing more disagreement? And the graph on the lower right can help illuminate this. And you see that the gray line is the expert ratings and the black solid line is the ratings by the volunteers. And what we learned from this graph is that at the healthy end of the scale and then at the sickest end of the scale, we see very good agreement between the two raters. And it's in the middle where we see some separation between the ratings. And in this case, the volunteers are slightly underestimating the level of stress as compared to the experts. To me, this is interesting and makes some sense. In the middle of the range, you could probably go either way with some of your estimates, but the important thing is that the healthiest trees are being assessed correctly, and then, of course, the sickest trees are being assessed correctly. So at the end of this project, we were able to produce a map of all the trees in Oconomowoc, and we color-coded them by stress rating, and this provided a resource for the city forester to go out or send his crews out to check the trees to figure out which ones, prioritize which ones might need to be taken down. And one thing I'd like to stress here is that this rating system and what the volunteers created was really just a basis for the forester to use to send experts out to do a further assessment of the trees. And so if a tree was highly stressed but not very big, his crews could say that they didn't need to focus on that right now, but then another tree might look extremely hazardous. And so we're letting the professionals make the final determination on what's hazardous and what's not. And this is really important from a liability standpoint. And at this point, I'd like to turn it back over to Rachel to talk about some of the tools we've developed that are based on the methodology that I just described.